Professor Velnath could not believe what he was seeing. For 300 cycles he had curated the most extensive collection of ancient weaponry in the Galactic archives. His exhibit showcased the finest examples of combat instruments from 72 different species, each piece carefully preserved, catalogued and displayed with exhaustive historical context. Students from across 12 sectors traveled to attend his lectures. He had written 4 books, he had received the Golden Spiral Award twice, and now this impossibly young human with her ridiculous ponytail and her battered backpack, was standing in front of his prized Korthian battle staff and giggling. Actually giggling. "Excuse me," Velnath said, his throat sacs inflating with indignation. "May I ask what you find so amusing about a weapon that brought down the Korthian Empire?" The human, who had introduced herself as Jessica Park when she walked into his classroom that morning, turned to face him. Her eyes were still watering from laughter. "I'm sorry, Professor. Really I am. It's just that nobody would actually fight with this thing." Velnath's secondary eyelids blinked rapidly. Around them, the other students in his advanced xenoarchaeology seminar had gone completely silent. His teaching assistant, a nervous Peluvian named Kort, made a small squeaking noise that indicated extreme second-hand embarrassment. "Miss Park," Velnath said slowly, carefully, as one might address a child who had just announced that stars were in fact tiny glowing insects. "That staff is forged from compressed titanite. It weighs approximately 60 standard units. It was wielded by Warlord Krenthis himself during the siege of Pale Moon Station." "Yeah, I can see that," Jessica said, nodding. "And I'm sure Warlord Krenthis had great publicity shots taken with it, but actually swinging this thing in combat? No way. Look at the grip placement." She reached toward the display case. "Do not touch the," Velnath began, but Jessica had already bypassed the magnetic lock with a casual swipe of her student credentials. The case hummed open. "How did you?" "My mom's an archivist," Jessica said absently. She lifted the battle staff out of its cradle. Every student in the room leaned back instinctively. The weapon was as tall as she was, a gleaming rod of ancient death that had supposedly claimed 10,000 lives. Jessica held it like she was considering buying a broom at a hardware store. "See? Right here?" She pointed to the ornate grip section, which was covered in elaborate carvings of Korthian conquest scenes. "These decorative ridges? They'd absolutely shred your palms during extended combat. And the weight distribution is completely off. The center of mass is way too far forward. After about 5 swings, your shoulders would be screaming." Velnath felt a strange sensation in his primary brainstem. It took him a moment to identify it as uncertainty, an emotion he had not experienced in an academic context for several decades. "The Korthians were renowned warriors," he said, but his voice had lost some of its authority. "The Korthians were renowned for having really good PR," Jessica corrected. She put the staff back, carefully, reverently even. "I'm not saying they weren't tough. I'm saying this specific weapon is ceremonial. Nobody used this in actual combat. You'd need medical attention after every battle and not from enemy attacks." Kort raised one of his smaller tentacles. "Professor Velnath, if I may, the human does raise an interesting point about the grip design, and whose side are you on?" Velnath snapped. The rest of the 2-hour seminar did not improve his mood. They moved through the exhibits, and at every single display Jessica found something wrong. Not historically wrong, which Velnath could have disputed with citations and peer-reviewed articles. No, she found them ergonomically wrong, practically wrong, and comfortably wrong. The Siluvian spike blade? The handle's too thin. After 20 minutes you'd have nerve damage in your fingers. The Brethnian throwing stars. Who designed these? Someone who hated their own hands. Those edges would cut the thrower as badly as the target. The Yalgathian-powered gauntlets. Okay, these are just hilariously bad. See where the power cell sits? Right against the inside of the wrist? That would heat up to about 100 degrees during operation. You'd give yourself second-degree burns every time you powered up. By the time they reached the human antiquities section, which Velnath had always considered a relatively minor part of his collection, Jessica's classmates were asking her to examine every single piece on display. Even Kort had started taking notes on her observation. Velnath stood to one side, his posture rigid, watching his life's work systematically deconstructed by someone who had been alive for barely 2 decades. "Now these," Jessica said, stopping in front of a glass case containing several primitive human weapons, "these are actually functional." Despite himself, Velnath's attention sharpened. "Go on." She pointed to a simple wooden stick with a curved blade attached to one end. "That's a scythe. Technically a farming implement, but humans use them as weapons when necessary. The grip is smooth, naturally curved to fit the palm. The blade angle means you can generate significant cutting force with minimal effort. Your hands might get blistered after extended use, but you wouldn't get injured just from holding it. Next, she indicated a long wooden bow. English longbow, probably 13th or 14th century. See the leather grip wrapping? That's not decorative. It's functional. Reduces friction, prevents blisters, gives you tactile feedback. The whole design is about putting maximum power into the arrow while minimizing strain on the archer. She moved to a sword, a brutally simple design with a cross-shaped guard and a leather-wrapped handle. Longsword. Not fancy. But look at the pommel weight. That's for balance. And the grip diameter is sized for a human hand in a specific stance. Everything about this weapon is designed so that someone could use it for hours without injury, assuming proper technique. Velnath found himself moving closer, seeing his own collection through entirely new eyes. Why? He asked. Why would humans design weapons with such obsessive attention to user comfort? Jessica looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Because we spent most of our history killing each other, Professor. We got really good at it. A weapon that hurts you to hold is a bad weapon. We figured that out early. There was a long silence. One of the other students, Aurelian with excellent color-changing abilities who was currently displaying nervous orange patterns, spoke up hesitantly. Miss Park, are you saying that most of the weapons in this collection are actually ceremonial items or propaganda pieces? Not all of them, Jessica said. But a lot of them. Yeah. Real combat weapons are usually pretty plain. They're tools. They need to work, over and over without falling apart or hurting the person using them. But the Korthian Empire, Velnath began, fell apart pretty quickly once they met organized resistance, right? Jessica said. She didn't sound smug. Just matter of fact. I'm guessing their actual soldiers used much simpler weapons than the stuff in museums. Velnath's throat sacs deflated slowly. The historical records do indicate that Korthian warriors typically carried secondary weapons that were less elaborate than their primary arms. There you go, Jessica said. She checked her datapad. Oh wow, I'm going to be late for Intro to Xenobiology. Professor, I really am sorry if I came across as disrespectful. Your collection is amazing. I just think maybe there's a difference between weapons that look impressive and weapons that were actually designed for fighting. She hurried toward the door, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Miss Park, Velnath called out. She turned. Would you be interested in a research assistant position? Jessica's face lit up. Seriously? Seriously. I suspect I may need to revise some of my work. Your perspective could prove valuable. After she left, promising to come by his office the next day to discuss details, Kort approached cautiously. That was unexpected, Professor. Indeed. Velnath looked around his exhibition hall, seeing decades of careful scholarship suddenly thrown into question. It should have felt devastating. Instead, he felt oddly energized. Kort, pull up all our records on actual combat reports from the various civilizations represented here, not ceremonial accounts or propaganda, but field reports, medical records, anything that describes weapons as they were actually used. That will take considerable time, Professor. Yes, Velnath agreed. I suspect we're going to be very busy. 3 weeks later, Velnath stood before the Galactic Archaeological Council, presenting his findings. His presentation was titled Ceremonial versus Functional, a reassessment of ancient weaponry through ergonomic analysis. The council members listened with varying expressions of skepticism and interest as he explained how a human undergraduate had systematically identified which pieces in his collection were actual combat weapons and which were likely ceremonial or propaganda objects. The key indicator, as it turned out, was remarkably simple. If holding the weapon would injure or exhaust the user during extended use, it probably wasn't a real combat weapon. This methodology, said Council Head Brethnian, a Aurelian with 17 eyes that could fix you with judgment from multiple angles simultaneously, seems overly simplistic. I thought so too, Velnath admitted. So we tested it. We examined 43 different civilizations' weaponry. In every single case, the weapons that showed signs of actual combat use, verified through molecular analysis of biological residue, were ergonomically sound. The ones that were merely displayed in positions of honor, the ones that appeared only in ceremonial contexts, those were the elaborate, uncomfortable pieces. You're suggesting, said another council member, that we've been misidentifying a significant portion of our collections? I'm suggesting, Velnath said carefully, that we've been taking propaganda at face value. Ancient civilizations, like modern ones, like to present idealized versions of themselves. The massive, jewel-encrusted sword looks impressive in a throne room. The simple, well-balanced blade that actually won battles gets used until it breaks, then gets recycled. There was muttering among the council members. How did a human student identify this pattern when trained xenoarchaeologists did not? Prithek asked. Velnath pulled up an image of Jessica, caught mid-laugh during one of their research sessions. Humans spent roughly 12,000 years in a state of near-constant warfare with each other. They developed tens of thousands of distinct weapon types. They have, in their own words, tried every possible way to hurt each other. This gives them an intuitive understanding of practical weapon design that most species lack. That's horrifying, someone muttered. That's humanity, Velnath said. And it makes them uniquely qualified to help us understand the difference between weapons designed to kill and weapons designed to impress. The council debated for 6 hours. In the end, they authorized a full review of combat artifacts across the entire Galactic Archives network. Jessica Park was hired as the lead consultant, with the authority to recruit other human experts as needed. Velnath watched from the gallery as the council voted, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Not pride in being proven right, but joy in being proven wrong in a way that opened up entirely new avenues of understanding. That, he reflected, was what education was supposed to feel like. Professor Velnath, Kort said quietly, sliding up beside him. There's another matter. Miss Park has been examining our collection of Brethnian tactical armor, and she says she needs to speak with you urgently. Something about how the entire Brethnian military complex might have been, in her words, the most elaborate practical joke in galactic history. Velnath felt his throat sacs inflate with what he was alarmed to realize was anticipation rather than indignation. Well, he said, gathering his materials. Let's go see what else I've been wrong about for the past 300 cycles. The Brethnian tactical armor incident turned out to be even worse than Velnath had anticipated. Jessica stood in the vault beneath the main archive building, surrounded by 3 complete sets of what the academic community had long considered the pinnacle of ancient military engineering. The armor gleamed under the preservation lights, each piece a masterwork of interlocking plates and sophisticated joint mechanisms. Okay, Jessica said, circling the display for the 3rd time. I need to say this carefully because I know this is going to sound insane, but I'm 99% sure the Brethnians never actually wore this armor. Velnath felt his left eye twitch. Miss Park, there are literally thousands of Brethnian military records describing this armor in combat. I know. I read them. That's what made me suspicious. Jessica pulled up her datapad, swiping through pages of translated text. Every single description is weirdly vague about the actual experience of wearing it. They talk about how intimidating it looks, how well it protects, how it represents Brethnian military superiority. But nobody ever mentions how it feels. And Professor, this thing would feel absolutely terrible. She pointed to the chest plate. This weighs about 200 pounds by itself. The Brethnians were strong, sure, but not that strong. Then you add the limb sections, the helmet, all the articulation mechanism. You're looking at 400, maybe 450 pounds of metal that has to move with your body. The powered joints, Kort offered hesitantly. The historical text reference an internal power system. Right, that's what I thought too. Jessica reached toward the nearest suit. May I? Velnath gestured his permission, beyond caring about protocol anymore. Jessica activated the chest plate's access panel. A sequence that took her approximately 15 seconds despite the fact that it had taken Velnath's team 3 years to figure out the mechanism. She really did have her mother's archival skills. Inside the chest cavity, a series of power conduits ran through channels along the interior surface. Jessica traced them with one finger. See these conduits? They're in direct contact with where the wearer's torso would be. Now look at this. She pulled up a thermal analysis on her datapad. When this system is active, these conduits heat up to approximately 140 degrees. For comparison, the Brethnian tolerance for sustained heat exposure is about 90 degrees. Velnath stared at the readings. That's impossible. The armor would cook the wearer alive. Exactly. And it gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective. Jessica moved to the helmet. This design completely blocks peripheral vision. The eye slits give you maybe 30 degrees of forward visibility. The hearing dampeners reduce external sound by 70%, and the breathing apparatus, which is mandatory because the seal is airtight, restricts oxygen flow to about 60% of normal intake. She stepped back, gesturing at the full suit. So you're asking a soldier to carry 450 pounds, get heat exhaustion from their own power supply, lose most of their vision and hearing, and operate on limited oxygen. For what purpose? This isn't armor. This is a suicide machine. The vault was very quiet. Then what? Velnath said slowly. Is it? Jessica grinned, and Velnath was beginning to recognize that expression. It meant she had figured something out that was going to make him question everything. It's a bluff. The Brethnians were masters of psychological warfare. They spent huge amounts of resources building these incredibly elaborate armor suits, made sure everyone knew about them, spread detailed technical specifications, and probably paraded them around during ceremonial occasions. But in actual combat, I bet they wore something much simpler. You're suggesting the entire Brethnian military apparatus was theater? Velnath felt dizzy. Not all of it, just the scary parts. Think about it from their enemy's perspective. You hear about these unstoppable armored warriors, you see images and recordings of them. You read intelligence reports about their capabilities. Then when you actually fight Brethnian forces, they're tough and well-trained. Sure, but they're not wearing the nightmare suits. But you assume that's because you're fighting regular troops, not the elite units. The psychological impact does the work without anyone ever having to actually use the unusable armor. Korthian's tentacles had gone completely still, which indicated he was thinking very hard. Professor, do you remember the Brethnian collapse? Of course. They were defeated by the Tuluvian alliance in a series of surprisingly quick battles. Surprisingly quick, Kort repeated. The historical consensus has always been that the Brethnians were overconfident. But what if they simply didn't have the military capability everyone assumed they had? Jessica snapped her fingers. Exactly. They built their entire empire on reputation. Once someone actually challenged them seriously, the bluff got called. Velnath sat down on a storage crate, his legs suddenly unreliable. How many other civilizations in our archives might fall into this category? Well, Jessica said, pulling up a list on her data pad. I've been making notes. The list was 17 civilizations long. Over the following months, Velnath's life transformed in ways he had not anticipated. His office, once a quiet sanctuary of scholarship, became the center of what the university administration had started calling the ergonomic revolution. Jessica brought in other humans to consult on specific weapon types. There was Marcus Liu, a historical martial arts expert who took one look at the Uralian chain whip and immediately asked if it was a torture device. There was Ahisha Okonkwo, a military historian who explained in extensive detail why the Frelian phalanx formation would have resulted in catastrophic friendly fire casualties. There was Dmitry Volkov, who specialized in siege weaponry and who nearly cried laughing at the Tuluvian battering ram, which he insisted would break the arms of anyone attempting to use it. The academic community's response was mixed, which was putting it politely. Professor Thendril, who had spent 40 years studying Frelian military culture, refused to speak to Velnath after the phalanx report was published. Dr. Yellingworth submitted a scathing rebuttal that was mostly personal attacks dressed up in academic language. The Brethnian Cultural Preservation Society filed an official complaint, though Jessica pointed out that there were no actual Brethnians left to be offended, so really it was just other academics being upset on behalf of an extinct civilization. But there were supporters too. Younger scholars, mostly, who saw the ergonomic analysis method as a way to cut through centuries of accumulated assumptions. Field archaeologists, who had always wondered why excavated weapons seemed different from museum pieces. Even some military analysts from current galactic powers, who wanted to review their own historical records for similar propaganda patterns. The breakthrough came when they examined the Peluvian Dominion. The Peluvians had controlled 47 star systems at their height, maintained the largest standing military in known history, and had supposedly equipped every soldier with personal energy shields that made them nearly invulnerable. Their military doctrine was taught in strategy courses across the galaxy. It took Jessica about 20 minutes to prove the energy shields had never existed. Look at the power requirements, she said, presenting to a packed lecture hall. Each shield supposedly operated continuously for 72 hours on a single charge. But the power cells we've recovered from Peluvian sites can't hold more than 6 hours of charge, and that's for basic equipment. For a personal shield with the described capabilities, you'd need a fusion reactor the size of a transport ship. She pulled up technical schematics. The Peluvians were excellent engineers. They knew this. So either they discovered a revolutionary power source that somehow left no trace in any archaeological record, and was never mentioned in any of their technical documentation, or the shields were made up. But the battle reports, protested a student in the back. There are thousands of accounts describing Peluvian shield technology, written by Peluvians, Jessica countered. And here's the interesting part. When you look at reports from their enemies, the shields are barely mentioned. What is mentioned repeatedly is Peluvian tactical flexibility, superior coordination, and really effective use of cover. They were good soldiers, they just weren't invulnerable. Velnath watched the audience process this information. He could see the moment it clicked, the same moment he had experienced months ago. That creeping realization that they had been accepting stories instead of demanding evidence. Why didn't anyone catch this before? Another student asked. Because humans are paranoid, Jessica said cheerfully. We assume everyone is lying to us because we lie to each other constantly. It's not even malicious, it's just how our diplomacy works. Bluffing, misdirection, strategic deception. We do it so naturally that we spot it in others. After the lecture, Velnath found himself approached by Dean Krelnix, the university's head administrator. Krelnix was an old Theluvian who had been in education longer than Velnath had been alive. Your work is causing significant disruption, Krelnix said without preamble. I'm aware. Half my faculty won't talk to you. The other half want to completely restructure their curricula. I've received complaints from 14 different cultural preservation organizations, and 3 governments have requested copies of your unpublished research. Velnath waited. It's excellent, Krelnix said, and Velnath's throat sacs nearly inflated right out of his skin. Absolutely excellent, uncomfortable, controversial, and probably correct. I'm increasing your research budget by 40% and giving you 2 additional graduate assistant positions. Also, the Chancellor wants to create a new interdisciplinary program combining archaeology, military history, and ergonomic analysis. They want you to head it. I don't know what to say. Say you'll stop letting that human student break into sealed archive cases. I know she has authorization now, but she's teaching the other students how to bypass the locks, and we're finding people in restricted sections at all hours. After Krelnix left, Velnath found Jessica in one of the research labs, examining a Brethnian ceremonial dagger that she insisted was actually a dinner utensil. We're getting official recognition, he told her, and funding, and possibly creating an entirely new academic discipline. That's amazing. Jessica looked up from the dagger. Does this mean I can finally get access to the Korthian imperial vaults? Because I have so many questions about their supposedly unbeatable war machines. What kind of questions? The kind where I think their war machines probably couldn't move without falling apart, but I need to see the actual schematics to be sure. Velnath's throat sacs did their new involuntary inflation thing that he had learned meant anticipation mixed with existential dread. You're going to tear apart the entire historical consensus on Korthian military superiority, aren't you? I mean, probably. Does that bother you? Velnath considered this. 6 months ago it would have devastated him. Now, after systematically discovering that much of his life's work had been cataloging elaborate lies and propaganda, he found he was mostly curious about what they'd learn next. Not particularly. When do you want to start? Tomorrow? I've already submitted the access requests. Of course you have. That evening, Velnath stood in his office, looking at the wall where he had once displayed his Golden Spiral awards. He had taken them down last week, not out of shame but because they represented a version of scholarship he had moved beyond. In their place he had hung something else. A simple human weapon, a knife really, with a wooden handle and a plain steel blade. Jessica had given it to him as a gift, explaining it was a reproduction of a design that humans had used, with minor variations for over 10,000 years. It's not fancy, she had said, but it works. You can use it all day without hurting yourself. That's what real tools look like. Velnath ran one finger along the smooth handle, feeling the grain of the wood. The weapon fit comfortably in his grip despite not being designed for his species. The balance was intuitive. The blade edge was sharp, but the spine was thick enough to provide control. It was, he realized, probably the most honest object in his entire collection. His datapad chimed. A message from the Galactic Archaeological Council. They were formally requesting his presence to present his methodology to their full assembly. 17 other institutions had already begun implementing ergonomic analysis in their own collection. 3 governments had declassified military records to allow for historical comparison studies. The academic world was changing, and a human undergraduate with a ponytail and an uncomfortable amount of common sense had started it by pointing out that some old weapons would hurt to hold. Velnath laughed, a sound he had not made in his office for perhaps a decade. Then he sat down to prepare his presentation for the council, already thinking about which sacred cows of archaeological consensus he was going to let Jessica butcher next. Outside his window, the university campus stretched out beneath 3 moons full of students from 100 different species, all trying to understand the galaxy's past. Tomorrow, some of them would learn that much of what they thought they knew was wrong, and that, Velnath thought, with genuine pleasure, was what education was supposed to be about. Uncomfortable truths and honest questions. The comfortable lies could take care of themselves.